Welcome to this special edition of Circle Back. My name is Sam Davidson, your host. I'm the CEO of Nashville Entrepreneur Center. Today, with this special edition drop, we have Mayor Freddie O'Connell, the 10th mayor of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County. We have a wide-ranging discussion, but it's exciting because the first half of the episode, Mayor O'Connell really details his own background as a tech entrepreneur. He talks about his journey in Nashville when he was starting out back from college, and it's kind of cool. You get to hear some names of companies and of individuals that you might remember. It's a little tech history of the city. The second half, we get to dive in and we really talk about the similarities of entrepreneurship and politics, of how dreaming up and launching a venture is kind of the same as dreaming up and launching a campaign. And Freddie's done his fair share of that as a council person, as mayor, and now as the mayor with the new transit referendum that's on the ballot for November 5th. So look, it's a wide-ranging conversation. It's a fun one. We have a couple of laughs, but I'd love for you to listen. And as you listen, please be sure to subscribe, to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Just a reminder that, as always, Circle Back is brought to you by the generosity of the Beth and Randy Chase family, as well as Nashville Post. Thank you for tuning in today. Enjoy the conversation. I'm here today joined by the 10th mayor of Nashville, the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, Freddie O'Connell. Mr. Mayor, thanks for making time.
I'm glad to do it and impressed that you know the
whole thing. I've heard it. We were saying earlier, I'm at stuff you're at now, so I get to hear the intro. Well, look, we've got you in the seat today. We're excited to talk about a couple things, but same question I ask everybody here. Who was the first entrepreneur that you ever remember meeting or knowing?
So the people that kind of, I think, got me really started on my journey in both software and technology, and I think just thinking about what entrepreneurism is, what it is like to build a team, and what culture is, was the guys at Telelink. And so it was Bill Butler, Tim Moses, Thomas Connor, eventually Bob Colley was in that mix, and they were kind of, I mean, those three guys, and then Bob. For a few years there when I was still in college, and then right after as they kind of started another venture. But it was a really great place to be.
And then from that, what you saw of them, talk about your entrepreneurial attempts, ambitions, anything you did, even at a young age where you're like, I'm going to try something.
Yeah, it really went straight from that. So I had that internship experience most of the way through college. They actually tried to hire me out of college. And I was like, guys, I'm like, 80% of the way done. I think I'm going to finish. And so I stuck it out. In the meantime, they sold Telelink. It was sort of before the original .com collapse. And so PSINet was actually the number 2 internet service provider in the country. And it was really fascinating, though, to be here in Nashville, which especially at the time wasn't even close to being a beacon for kind of tech companies. The knowledge economy was not particularly strong, but we had a couple of key small businesses here that were really the dawn of the internet in Nashville and Middle Tennessee. And so Telelink was one of them. And so I did come back after college. They had started their next venture, originally called Monster Labs. It then became SiteMason. It has since kind of folded into what Jack Massari had built right along the time that Telelink was going, was a company called ICG Link. And so Thomas Connor's still been operationally involved, but SiteMason, unfortunately, we kind of launched our product right into the .com collapse. Good. So it was, it was very exciting. It wasn't great timing from a venture standpoint, and it was a really interesting lesson in how significant an impact kind of external market forces can have. Like in those early days of building, I mean, you probably remember the phrase irrational exuberance, but we had a lot of kind of early online enthusiasm for what we were building and some really cool technology. They had assembled a great team to kind of get SiteMason pulled together. You maybe like marginally overstaffed a little bit for where we were before we kind of, started to have real revenue opportunities, but not in a big way. I remember not too distant in time from that was smallbusiness.com, right? And so it sort of felt like, but that felt like something you could do in Nashville at that time was create those kind of resources and those kinds of platforms. And so SiteMason had a really hard time getting off the launch pad, partly because of the economy. But we knew tech wasn't dead in Nashville. And so it was really interesting. After that, I had really been there focused on database technology for SiteMason and took those skills, and nearby Emma was about 7 or 8 people strong at that point. And it was, another incredible group of entrepreneurs, Will Weaver, Clint Smith, Marcus Whitney was there. And I kind of came in right after Jackson Miller had left, another fixture of our local tech and entrepreneur scene. And, really was involved in an early, are we going to lose the business over this situation? So I was kind of there doing some surgery at the database level. And another friend of mine who had been a part of the SiteMason ecosystem, we kind of decided to join forces and start up a little company supporting businesses like that from both a systems and database side. And then it was really interesting because that was also at the time where search engine optimization was becoming an important function of marketing and digital visibility. And so we added a third partner and started to build some tools that went more in that direction. And it's almost like we started at the very bottom of the stack of technology that businesses at the time were really focused on. I mean, it was, this is before there was a cloud. I, spent a lot of time in co-location facilities and server rooms back then. And so we went almost to the other end of the stack and kind of starting to help companies think about marketing. And, again, thinking about how technology and business play together. One of our core customers was the Nashville Post when they were still an online-only publication. And I wound up drifting out of our agency and the focus on SEO, and went and spent a couple of years over at Nashville Post as director of technology. And so it was also really interesting to see technology, what business, where the business environment around you needed support, all the way from that kind of server infrastructure, databases, bandwidth, and all of that, all the way up through not just websites, but the emergence of social media, and then literally taking that into where traditional media and technology were going to be. So I had a lot of really fascinating experiences.
And you were part of that journey during part of that time, I guess, is you were a member here at the EC as part of that.
So that was after, so then again, kind of hearkening back to the, just having great people, strong culture, intentional founders. I spent several years with Rusticy Software, and I know Mike has been somebody who's been involved at the Entrepreneur Center as well. Mike Rusticy, one of the co-founders of the software company. And so after that, I came here, and he was kind of doing a twist on social media, and it was just like a self-imposed challenge of, can I launch something within 30 days, like take an idea to actual implementation and then take it. And it was a great adventure. And it was, you were always learning lessons, and it's just interesting to see where you think your cash flow is versus where it really is. And so, didn't get as far as I wanted to, but I had already joined the Metro Council at that point. But once again, it's funny. It's the way, the network of people I bumped into, another friend who was in a startup with, a great business idea, and kind of had yet another opportunity to go start something at the early stage. And once again, got to be there for the formation of a great team. And then COVID hit.
There you go.
So I have, and for a little bit there, I think that type of venture capital got a little bit dicey, and so, but that experience from the original .com collapse and its impact on the startup environment, COVID and its impact on capital access in the startup environment, it's really fascinating that I wound up in circumstances with startups in those really key moments, and having to, sort of sort through the challenges that came with it.
And that journey, it's interesting, one, because it sort of is a nice accounting of some of this tech history that I think has been so interesting, critical, vital the last 20, even 30 years.
Right.
And during that time, as you mentioned, you tried some things. How did any of that translate? And I don't necessarily go into, we'll call it politics yet, but in terms of your civic engagement, because before you were council person, obviously before you were mayor, you were involved civically. You had a heart for the city. You grew up here, where you decided to live, being on what was then the MTA, being involved with that board. What translated? Did one motivate another where you were like, look, if I'm going to grow a business here, there's something I need to pay attention to that's happening civically also?
You know, they were really happening more on parallel tracks, except that I would say the one thing that linked them was, you know, a couple things. Emma started really around the corner from an apartment I was in right off of 30th. They were on 29th, if I'm remembering correctly, right adjacent to Centennial Park. So I was walking distance to Emma. When we started our own agency and business, kind of supporting them and some other local companies, including Nashville Post, we were, again, literally around the corner. So I had not only one of the key businesses I was working on behalf of, but the business that we wound up founding within a couple blocks of my apartment at the time. And so that walkability, that was also in a time when I was, car free, which again wasn't related to the business decision, the tech environment, but I could still move around pretty quickly. I was, like so many of the people at that time, because I had such early exposure to the internet, knew how to do plenty of stuff on behalf of the people that we had on our customer roster, just from either my home office or the office just a few blocks away. Everything felt pretty close and connected. And so during that time, I wound up also, it was not that long after that. So wound up saving up for a house, moved up over to Salem Town. And then right around that period is when I was invited to join the board of directors for Nashville MTA. And so that level of civic engagement, and two, I think in technology, maybe uniquely, it's not like a corporate office job most of the time where you feel like you can't step away from your desk for an hour in the middle of the day. I was very, very lucky that my role, my skills and abilities and background allowed me to work with employers or as a founder to carve out the space to be engaged civically. Because, for better or for worse, all of these things we've done as a local government for now generations, some of them do take place in the mid-afternoon or the late afternoon, something that you'd call, part of the standard workday from a 9-to-5 standpoint or, kind of standard business hours standpoint. And it's really more that technology and entrepreneurship were enabling a level of civic engagement than I was thinking about them as related to one another. And by the time I was at Rustici, I had been in Salem Town for a few years, had kind of been invited into neighborhood leadership role there, and had some people encourage me to run for Metro Council, which I'll say when I bought my house was not even in the top 100 list of ideas of how I expected to later spend my time. But it turned out to also be very related to conversations I was already having about community and education and infrastructure and transit and kind of mobility issues. And so I thought about it. I approached Mike and Tim, the co-founders at Rustici, and the common thread of really, and I think this speaks really well of the overall either founder community or business community here, is that at every time when I wasn't always the one in charge of, hey, this is our workforce, I always had founders or employers that said, hey, look, as long as you're, doing your thing, make sure you're clear with your team, make sure you're getting your stuff done, and then go for it. And that was the charge, and it worked, and it was great.
Well, then how much of that? And so I'm gonna make a guess, and you tell me where I'm right or wrong. Because other than being student body president at Hume Falk High School in 1999, I haven't really.
This is a fun fact.
It's still on my resume. It's still on my resume. I've not run a campaign, but there seems to be, from the outside in, some parallels between starting or running a company and starting and running a campaign, because you're essentially going out and say, hey, I have an idea to make something better, and that's at least what we hope with our our best attention politicians. Something is broken, I want to fix it. Something is okay, I want to make it better. Here's a problem I want to solve. And you go out there and you're convincing, whether it's funders or customers or voters or donors, hey, I think I'm the person to do it. I think this is the team to surround it. I think this is the approach. You got to convince them in the form of votes or funding or customers or something. It's usually a condensed period of time, so a campaign can last a certain amount of time. So tell me either where that tracks, where it doesn't track, and how you might have approached, especially the council piece of it. We'll talk about your run for mayor, learning what you did from entrepreneurship and maybe applying or improving upon it.
No, it's funny because I did talk exactly about this, at least at one point, maybe a couple over the course of the past couple of years on the campaign trail, because, you're out there raising money.
Yep.
You do sort of have a key liquid event you're targeting.
There you go.
Which is the election itself,
day. Okay.
Right? You do have to build a team on the fly pretty quickly. You've got to be very selective about the vendors you're going to work with who have, skills that support the idea. There is a core idea that you are, building the entire premise around, and so it had so many things that. And you've got to be very serious about the financial accountability in the mix too. So surprising amount of overlap with startup culture, with entrepreneurship, with that journey of starting something, and knowing too that when you go into it, there's like a lot of startup folks have experienced. I mean, you're putting a lot on the line. There's a lot of risk embedded in it, because at the end of it all, it's not like you pivot after Election Day if you were not successful.
That's right. And with that, especially your council run, the district you had, again, you may know the stats, but arguably kind of the most dense from a business, so many businesses in that district, so many different businesses in that district. So you got to know a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs.
Yep.
What over those 8 years might have been things you heard or learned or tried to understand from what they were doing as entrepreneurs that you kept in mind as you ran for mayor?
Very much that it's harder today in Nashville to have some of those early advantages I had, where not only did I have a reasonably low-cost apartment in a pretty central location, but I also had walking distance to 3 core places, because actually Nashville Post was just up the road too. So that cluster scenario is still in my mind, but also what it takes to start up. And that's why I actually think the Entrepreneur Center is so valuable, because entrepreneurs can come here and have the sensibility of a co-working space or something a little bigger and more substantial than that, have access to something like this that's a studio for content, can network with one another. And so those kinds of things are on my mind. Toward the end of my Metro Council tenure, I sat down with some of the folks from Corner to Corner, which is a totally different model than what I think the Entrepreneur Center is doing. But I heard from a lot of businesses that were kind of, in the target audience for what Corner to Corner is offering as a vehicle for people starting businesses, and from the community that was here at the Entrepreneur Center. Now, also had a lot of engagement, again, based on where I was with the Nashville Downtown Partnership, so some larger corporate entities, and so keeping track of those total number of jobs in and near downtown. I mean, topping the 100,000 mark for just where our workforce was, with the Nashville Technology Council, because, it's always been something that I've had either direct or peripheral engagement with, just from a level of interest. And so as they got Tech Hill Commons pulled together, again, another important hub for conversations not dissimilar from this one, in terms of where our overall software and technology industry ecosystem, all of that is. And then, looking at Lipscomb creating a presence like Spark, thinking through how they are offering thoughts that are innovation related to their student body, to their faculty and staff as well. That was a surprisingly interesting conversation with what they were doing. And so, I had a lot of fascinating conversations about the different spaces of what it's like to either start a small business in an emerging district like along Buchanan Street or where Jefferson Street's Renaissance might be, the music-specific conversation around Music Row that I was deeply involved in over the past decade, what it means to be in or near downtown, or what emerging districts like what's happening at Newhoff or what we've seen happening at in Wedgwood, Houston. All of those things were conversations I was deeply involved in.
I assume all that then informs your run for mayor, where, again, similar, parallel, but now more people to convince, or more money to raise, or a bigger, higher pressure exit liquidity event. So,
right, exactly.
Again, what of those? And then also would love for you to speak. I thought, I remember reading the article, and you may have said it before then, but where you just said one word, and it was the word stay.
Yeah.
And so encouraging citizens,
Yep.
businesses, entrepreneurs, et cetera. So talk about how maybe that message developed, but also why that applies, why you think that applies to entrepreneurs during that run and now a year into the office.
Yeah. So a year in and after the importance of that, we're still keenly aware of the challenges. We know the political landscape in the state doesn't always reflect the preferences of people in Nashville. That's going to be a challenge for some time to come, I think. We know that because we have grown over the past decade and had some volatility with how we interact with our growth, because we've had this extraordinary pandemic to respond to at a local level in terms of how we just interact socially, how our discourse plays out both online and offline, and just really kind of how well or unwell we are as a city, as people who've had, third spaces ripped away from us for a while. And I've literally had friends, as we've kind of re-engaged in the past couple of years, say out loud some variation of, I've forgotten how to talk to people or
Sure.
be around other people, right? I think those things are all there. The cost of living, though, is a big one. And so we really do focus on, like, our policy agenda for this first year has been so focused on, we had 3 transition committees, but they all interact around 2 basic principles of cost of living and quality of life. And we want to drive down cost of living as much as we can with public policy tools, and then we want to enhance quality of life. And sometimes that means ensuring that our amazing creative class that's settled here in Nashville always feels like they've got a great outlet and that there is this cluster opportunity around it, but then also that we're doing things like walkability and offering transit, and that's so much of that thinking is embedded in the transportation improvement program we've got on the table right now.
And that itself is yet another effort, startup, awareness fund, everything raising opportunity.
Yep.
How has that process been, and what are the overlaps? But then also speak a little bit to how the plan you put forth, the vote upcoming, is something that entrepreneurs should look at and take seriously in terms of
Sure.
keeping Nashville, just like you said, a place that can be innovative and where these businesses can have just an easier time of starting something.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there are some ways in which the mayor's office itself, you're not exactly starting from scratch. So it's not quite, there are some similarities to the existence of a startup, but they more have to do with the way you build out that team over the first 100 days. You do need to get a fairly entrepreneurial-minded team involved. Now, Metro itself, right? This is a decades-old institution of local government with dozens of departments, another several dozen boards and commissions that support them, an executive branch and a legislative branch, and then, sort of at a local level, a judicial branch that's there. So we have all of this apparatus of local government. That's not very startup-y. But the way the mayor's office functions within that, it's almost, and this was an interesting model too. Along that journey, right after Site Mason, I had been at Net Central, which was a local e-commerce company that had been acquired by Books A Million. But what Books A Million did as this, publicly traded company based out of Birmingham was they basically left Net Central alone. It remained intact here in Nashville. The founders were still there. These guys, Craig and Cy, great guys. And they also could build sort of a team and a culture that was embedded within this much larger kind of institutional bureaucratic thing. And it worked. And in so many ways, that's actually what the mayor's office feels like in the institution of Metro. Now, in this first year, we've kind of had two more entrepreneurial things that have been these big picture things. One has been led by Bob Mendez, and that was the effort to get the East Bank underway, knowing that the Titans were building a new stadium, knowing that we had 100 plus acres of public land, and frankly, with gratitude to Mayor Cooper for setting up a high quality planning process and built kind of planting the seeds of an East Bank team. We could step into that. The Cooper administration was incredibly helpful during the transition, which again, there's sort of this model of how you think about leadership development, leadership, succession planning, all of those. There's a little bit of that occurred, and it was very helpful in the mayor's office process. Well, Bob took those early elements of the East Bank team. By the time we took office, an RFP had been executed, started working with the Fallon Company, so it's a public-private partnership. But we had key leadership from Metro Planning, from Parks, from the Nashville Department of Transportation, NDOT, and then some overlap with things that were happening with Metro Water, obviously with the Titans, with the Fallon Company, and we got a master development agreement done earlier this year, and more recently we spent some time and energy building an important tool that we'll use for decades, long after Bob and I are out of these roles, called the East Bank Development Authority. But Bob really also created sort of an entrepreneurial ecosystem to go chase that stuff over the past year. Now, separately, we brought Michael Briggs over to the mayor's office from Vanderbilt University to lead up our transportation planning effort, and very similarly, we had key leadership from WeGo, our local transit agency, and key leadership from our local DOT, NDOT, and key leadership from planning. And Michael worked with them to basically build a program quickly that we could have comply with some old bipartisan legislation called the Improve Act that lets you secure dedicated funding for transportation and infrastructure. And we basically said to our core departments that do those things here on the ground, take the best ideas that you've already had, take this alignment that you're already moving toward, and help us produce it in a packaged form that we can attach a specific funding mechanism to, and ensure that over a 15-year period, we could go build that out and build out the service delivery and the infrastructure delivery on top of it. And so Bob and Michael, as key parts of our administration, have really been pursuing both of those things. And I would say each of them will wind up being of interest to our entrepreneurial community, because we're creating brand new neighborhoods across the river that we hope complement the rest of downtown. There will be a mix of uses there. I am positive that over the next decade, you'll have some interesting commercial office space there. But one way or another, the Entrepreneur Center will literally be walking distance from the stuff that emerges on the East Bank. We will have new parks and greenways, all of these things that are livability. It'll be a strong mixed income community with a century's worth of attainable housing built into it. And then with our transportation improvement program, it is coming up on the ballot. Early voting starts October 16th. Election day is November 5th. Everybody will, see the traditional stuff like president and U.S. Senate and Congress and all the state races. But at the very end of your ballot, you will also see our transportation improvement program, which we think is going to be important for economic development and workforce development, which we think is going to be a really important tool for affordability and putting pressure on that cost of living. But we also think it's going to be something that meaningfully enhances quality of life. If you look at the contrast between Main Street and Gallatin Pike in East Nashville today to places like Hillsborough Village or the new 12 South as it connects from the Gulch into the 12 South community, you just see the difference of what it means to have people walking around in a community, to be able to turn the corner and without walking down a dirt path or in a ditch or on a shoulder, be in the small business district or be at the child care center or be at the grocery store. And that we've heard, and I've personally heard it in dealing with not just people in Nashville, but as we've toured systematically systematically cities across America, that this stuff really does matter to people who are thinking about being here to start or join businesses that have chosen to be in Nashville.
And that's one of my fears is in this role. In all my business, I've always looked sort of downstream in terms of where's the supply coming from. So when I ran a company that sourced from small businesses, it was like, well, are there going to be enough small businesses? Who's making more small businesses? So here at the Entrepreneur Center, it's like, are we going to have still a supply? And part of me says, oh yeah, the people that move here, even if it's for a corporate reload job, they eventually might think entrepreneurially, and great, here we are. But part of where I worry is that, especially maybe a younger person, someone with a young family, says, man, Nashville's cool, I'd love to go there, but I'm sitting in traffic too much. I can't afford to live there. I can't afford to get around there. And so they pick a nearby peer city instead. And so part of how, when I've looked at this plan and heard about it and heard you talk about it, it is this idea that a Joe or Susie entrepreneur can make their dollar and their time last longer, so therefore they can keep hustling, keep finding customers, spend money on another resource rather than getting around or not getting around in that case.
Right. And our hope too is that one of the things of having, I hope a side effect of having a tech savvy mayor is that we're constantly also trying to provide access points, right? Mm-hmm. We've done through the years these kind of civic hackathons. We just relaunched our open data portal. I expect that there will be some people who look at some of these things and, if we're successful, look at this and say, well, the next transit app, right? One of the best apps out there for helping you do trip planning, you start to look at opportunities within Nashville where you're taking public data sets and building something that's really valuable for our local residents.
So yeah, kind of last question, as folks go to the polls, November 5th, as they read all the way down their ballot to see it, again, so any entrepreneur, you've got to paint a future picture here to sort of make your case. So, assuming this outcome is what you wanted and it passes, you mentioned 15 years. So let's start there. What could this city look like with the plan you've got in place and all those add-on effects in 15 years?
So my hope, if we get this right, is that over the next 15 years, as we start to transform corridors to make them safer, to make them complete streets where anybody can access them, is that we have these vibrant small business districts full of local shops, local restaurants, local outposts for people that are doing entrepreneurship, and that we've got more creative office space, and that by offering people more options, that people feel that pressure of coming out of college and feeling like the very first thing you've got to do when you get to Nashville is buy a car. If the very first thing you do when you get here is find a reasonably priced price to live, and it turns out your world for your work and where your friends are and all of those things are just a little bit closer to you, like what I experienced when I was coming back to Nashville, it just means that you start to see that opportunity to thrive happening in more parts of the city than just a handful. And I think that's really important. But my hope is that it means for people that all of those ideas become closer to them, and all of those opportunities as a result are also closer to them. I think it will probably mean just generally more attractive streetscapes. It should, if we're successful, then 15 years from now, for most of that generation, we'll be creating brand new neighborhoods on the east side of the Cumberland River, applying those practices, especially here in the near term, to get neighborhood scale investments out there, and generating things where your cost of living is going down, or at least there's pressure on it to keep it from going up anymore. And also that your quality of life has gotten better across the board because everything you came to Nashville for is closer within reach.
I like it. We'd love to see it.
Yeah.
So, Mayor O'Connell, you were generous with your time. Thanks for joining us on this special Circle Back episode. I appreciate it.
Glad to do it. And for anybody who's curious to learn more before November 5th, check out nashville.gov/transit.
Nashville.gov/transit. Thank you again, sir.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for tuning into this special edition of Circle Back, where my guest was Mayor Freddie O'Connell. We got the chance to talk all the overlaps and parallels between entrepreneurship and running a city as a mayor. Circle Back, as always, is brought to you by the Beth and Randy Chase family, as well as Nashville Post. Please listen, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you enjoy podcasts. Once again, I'm your host, Sam Davidson, and thanks for tuning in.